who wanted different for her. And if you are watching this and people are watching this, let her loss be a testament so that you don't have to go through this and your family doesn't have to go through this.
The stillness of mid-June 2020 shattered in a quiet Memphis neighborhood when gunshots rang out inside a home on Quinn Avenue, and a pregnant woman dropped dead in her home. This was 19-year-old Jamisha Kovson, a beloved daughter, treasured friend, and expecting mother. That night marked the end for her at the hands of a man she once loved.
We asked her to leave. We begged her to leave.
Everyone had seen the demon in her baby's father. It just took Jamisha a longer time. But when she did, she had discovered a dark secret that could end his life and freedom. So, he decided to end hers first. With 911 calls flooding into the police department, the cops quickly set out to the location of the shots fired. But they were too late, as the blooming mother had bled out on the floor, left to die. With her killer nowhere to be found, the cops were instantly on high alert. Their investigation would take them to a man with an intense bloodlust and a complete lack of empathy. To date, his inhumane nature remains with the officers, the judge, and all who encountered him. This is the life and death of Jamisha Kovson. Jamisha's story unfolded in the city of Memphis, Tennessee. This is a culturally rich and diverse city in Tennessee, celebrated for its blues, soul, and barbecue, as well as landmarks like Beale Street and the National Civil Rights Museum. The people are resilient, community-oriented, and deeply proud of their heritage. Various neighborhoods reflect the city's strong ties to music, art, and faith. However, by mid-2020, Memphis had one of the highest violent crime rates in the U.S., with a sharp rise in homicides and assaults, a statistic that Jamisha would soon join. Jamisha had grown up surrounded by a caring family who loved her deeply. Friends and relatives painted a picture of a modest young woman with a gentle voice and earnest smile, just beginning to chart a path as a young woman with a good head on her shoulders. She was in a relationship with Joshua Dodson, also from Memphis. It is unclear how they met or came to fall in love, but it is certain that they did fall hard for each other. Like every new love, it was rosy and sweet at first, especially for Jamisha. But everyone around her saw something different, and they tried to warn her. Friends could see very easily how evil and manipulative Joshua was. They saw it in the intense fights and heated arguments the couple had. It was obvious in the threats he threw her way. But even in the midst of such darkness, a blessing came. Jamisha discovered she was pregnant and was completely overjoyed. She had hopes for the future, holding her baby for the first time, continuing to deepen her relationships, and creating a safe home for her small family. But for the first time, she had to think about another person's safety, so she made a decision. By June 2020, Jamisha had made sure that the relationship had ended. It is not exactly sure when or why she ended it, but it is easy to see that she was tired of the toxic situation and wanted out. But it was not so easy to get rid of Joshua. Early on the morning of June 12th, Joshua showed up at Jamisha's house on Quinn Avenue. Accounts from investigators and neighbors say an argument between the former couple erupted from inside the home. It grew tense and violent, all because of Joshua's suspicions. Joshua believed Jamisha knew too much, way too much about him that could put him in trouble. It also suggested that he was pissed about a mysterious Facebook post and even about the baby in her belly. He was all around angry, and his wrath zeroed in on her as his victim. But as Jamisha ran from him and everything, Jamisha retreated into a room and shut the door behind her, seeking distance. But what happened next would change everything. A single gunshot rang out through that closed door. It did not find its mark, but the violence had begun. Joshua forced his way into the room and continued the confrontation. Jamisha was completely scared for her life and at his mercy. Then, just when she thought it was over, he surprised her. Joshua suddenly left. For a moment, it seemed the scene might calm, but just when hope for peace lingered, Joshua returned, and he was more determined this time. Moments later, several gunshots were unleashed through the door again, multiple bullets tearing through the barrier. Those rounds struck Jamisha, ending not only her life, but the life of her unborn child. As sharp adrenaline faded into icy shock, the house fell silent. Soon enough, screams and panicked phone calls broke that silence. Neighbors reported hearing gunfire. 911 lines rang full. Police rushed to the scene, desperate to make it in time to save a life. But the sight inside was something they could never get used to. Officers forced open the door and found Jamisha inside, bleeding heavily and unresponsive. Paramedics transported her immediately to a nearby hospital, but doctors were unable to save her or the baby she carried. It was certain. Jamisha Kovson and her unborn baby were dead, and the prime suspect would soon be revealed to be the third member of their small family. The investigation swung into motion almost instantly. Crime scene technicians combed the room, recovering bullet casings and documenting damage to door frames and walls. Investigators measured bullet trajectories and blood splatter patterns. Several witnesses testified that they had briefly seen Joshua outside the home, brandishing a firearm with a determined expression. It was only after examining the neighborhood security footage and witness accounts that detectives realized how quickly Joshua had vanished after the shots. He was determined to slip away, but the authorities were just getting started in their manhunt. Within hours, law enforcement issued alerts. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation added him to the most wanted list with a reward of $13,500, marking him as an armed and dangerous man. His image, recognized by distinctive facial tattoos, spread across city bulletins, social media feeds, and statewide alerts. Soon enough, federal authorities stepped in. The U.S. Marshals Gulf Coast Regional Fugitive Task Force joined the search. The fugitive's photo and known vehicle details were shared with every law enforcement agency from Memphis to Nashville. Multiple digital billboards flashed his name with up to $10,000 in rewards. Every agency was notified. Joshua Dodson, missing, possibly violent, to be apprehended immediately.
Man, this shit cool. These folk police in here cool. I'm still finna get out. I ain't studying this shit. Oh, God.
But detectives hit a wall. Joshua was nowhere to be found. Days passed as detectives followed multiple tips and traced his last known movements. Witness reports narrowed the trail, seen in parking lots, caught on random phone pings, and briefly captured on traffic cameras as they left Memphis. And then, one breakthrough turned the investigation around. On June 18, 6 days after the homicide, a man in Nashville resembling the wanted photo was pulled aside after a routine traffic stop. Confirmatory checks ensued, prints, tattoos, and finally, ballistic matches tied Joshua's weapon to the shell casings recovered in the home. He was immediately taken into custody. At that moment, it seemed like the most violent chapter of Jamisha's story appeared to be over, but the emotional chaos had already begun as his trial was about to start. For her family, there was no real relief. Speaking through tears, her loved ones described a hole left by her absence, one that justice couldn't fill. Her friends agreed that she was not perfect, but she was getting her life together, especially after they warned her to leave him.
She was just getting her life together, but she wasn't perfect one. Ain't no way of form fashion we was saying she perfect, but she was getting her together.
To them, even his confession would not bring peace. But the cops were determined to get that justice, and soon, investigators discovered another unsettling truth. As the forensic files were reviewed, information from Joshua's earlier life began to surface. It would soon become clear that Jamisha's murder was not an isolated crime. It was only the beginning. Detectives revisited unsolved murder investigations from 2019 and early 2020, involving 3 other victims: Devion, Renita, and Reginald, all shot in Memphis under eerily similar circumstances. Each case displayed patterns that prompted authorities to connect them to Joshua. Eventually, Joshua himself would confess. But for now, relief spread through the force. Right at that moment, Joshua's capture in Nashville marked a turning point. He was himself a fugitive on the FBI's top 10 list, apprehended just 6 days after Jamisha's killing. He was taken into custody and held without bond, initially charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder for Jamisha and her unborn child. The charges rapidly expanded as prosecuting teams added the earlier killings to their indictment strategy. As he remained behind bars, news of his arrest sent shockwaves through Memphis. Jamisha's family mourned deeply. Close friends and relatives described her as a devoted and hopeful young woman with dreams of future. At local memorials, mourners lit candles and left flowers, using vigils to raise awareness around the dangers of domestic violence and emotional manipulation. As fall 2024 approached, the trial for Jamisha's case began in earnest. But even as the proceedings went on in court, Joshua's behavior left the world in shock and helped the prosecution. Prosecutors presented a compelling sequence: forensic evidence, eyewitness testimony, surveillance footage, backed by Joshua's own social media references. They painted a narrative that the events on Quinn Avenue were not isolated, but part of a broader pattern. Then came a moment that stunned the courtroom. Joshua took the stand in his own defense. Rather than expressing regret, he admitted to being a serial killer and compared himself to Michael Myers. He even admitted responsibility for the earlier murders of Divion, Renita, and Reginald. This instantly reshaped how the prosecution approached the evidence and destroyed defense's case. Despite the defense team's framing of these admissions as bravado or a mental breakdown, the jury found the admissions compelling.
Also new this midday, a Shelby County jury found a man guilty for killing his girlfriend and unborn child. That jury convicted Joshua Dodson after a 3-day trial. Police say that Dodson shot and killed Jamisha Cufson and her unborn child at Cufson's South Memphis home in 2020. Dodson will be sentenced in the coming weeks. He now faces the possibility of life in prison without parole.
In August 2024, after a lengthy deliberation, the jury delivered their verdict. It was guilty verdicts on both counts of first-degree murder, one for Jamisha, the other for her unborn child. A hush fell over the courtroom. For Jamisha's family, the verdict brought relief, but also deep sorrow. For the community, it was a confirmation that calculated, premeditated violence would not be left unpunished. Community advocates, already shaken when Joshua himself proclaimed in court that he was a serial killer and compared himself to Michael Myers, demanded that the cases of Divion, Renita, and Reginald receive equal priority. They called for a special task force to ensure justice was delivered, not just for Jamisha, but for all victims linked to Joshua. Meanwhile, conversations began to swirl on social media and in local news coverage about a possible tie to another notorious figure, Jesse Dodson. Jesse was sentenced to death in 2008 after killing 6 people in a single night in Memphis, including his own brother and 2 children, leaving 3 young survivors whose testimony was critical at trial. Suddenly, Joshua faced speculation that he might be Jesse's nephew. Though no official link was ever confirmed, the theory added an unsettling layer to his profile and captured the public's attention, fueling broader questions about violence repeating within families. Meanwhile, the court prepared to deliver a heavy sentence on Joshua. The judge, reviewing the record, noted Joshua's chilling demeanor. He hadn't shown remorse during trial, even falling asleep in court at times. His courtroom identification as a serial killer and the breadth of his admissions convinced her that consecutive sentences were needed.
He is a serial killer. He's Michael Myers, remember? That's what he told me. In 20 years of practice, I've never seen anything this thorough, detailed, describing the criminal, sadistic behaviors you've exhibited, not only in jail, but towards staff with shanks and ice picks and sexually inexcusable behaviors, assaultive behaviors, constant. He wanted to speak, and he said that from day one, and we let him. He told his story. Unfortunately, his story is a story of wreaking absolute havoc on this community.
Now, it's at this point that the court had to consider Joshua's past. His criminal record traced back to when he was just 14. The judge cited his violent history as well as his testimony where he showed no remorse to justify the maximum sentence. She ruled the 2 life terms would run consecutively, not concurrently, because in her words, no lesser punishment would reflect the depth of harm inflicted. In October 2024, Joshua received a sentence totaling 102 years, 2 consecutive 51-year terms for Jamisha and her unborn child.
New at 4:30, a self-proclaimed serial killer will be spending the rest of his life in prison. Today, Joshua Dodson was sentenced to more than 100 years for the murder of his former girlfriend and her unborn child.
Dodson still has other assault and murder cases pending in our courts. He was immediately turned over to the Tennessee Department of Corrections to begin his sentence.
But then, the case entered another phase. District attorneys made it clear that additional indictments were forthcoming for Divion, Renita, and Reginald. Those trials would rely heavily on Joshua's own statements and the previously collected forensic evidence, offering hope to the family still awaiting justice. At the same time, neighborhood-based groups harnessed Jamisha's case to press for reforms in domestic violence prevention, mental health interventions, and prison release oversight. They argued that earlier signals, especially Joshua's violent history, should have triggered more decisive action long before tragedy struck. As Memphis prepared for the next series of trials, the families of all 5 victims watched closely, determined that justice be comprehensive and complete. Their resolve was fueled by heartbreak, but also by a shared belief that accountability could bring closure and possibly prevent future tragedies. Joshua's story, his brutal acts, self-proclaimed identity, courtroom admissions, and rumored link to Jesse has left an indelible scar on the city. Through it all, the community has banded together to mourn, support victims' families, and demand systemic accountability. However, the story didn't end in Jamisha's case. Less than 4 months later, in February 2025, the case took another dramatic turn. Joshua appeared in court again and entered guilty pleas in 3 additional murders: Divion Parker in 2019, and both Renita Bennett and Reginald Anderson in May 2020. This time, prosecutors secured a 159-year sentence, which would be added to his existing 102-year term. That brought the total to 261 years, ensuring that Joshua would never again walk free. As the sentence was read aloud, prosecutors emphasized that this wasn't just about punishing a man, but about protecting a community he had terrorized. And ever since then, officials have stood by the sentence as a symbol of unflinching accountability. Still, even this measure of justice couldn't fully repair what has been lost. In Memphis and beyond, people continue to grapple with the enormity of the tragedy. Advocacy groups issued statements of solidarity, urging renewed attention to domestic violence and the silent dangers many women face while trying to escape. Meanwhile, the community sought ways to honor Jamisha's memory. Her funeral had taken place in late October, not long after the original verdict. Friends and family gathered to say goodbye to the young woman they had loved so fiercely. Her sister described her as nurturing, loyal, and full of hope for her future. She was just 19 years old when she died, 5 months pregnant, and already raising a young child. But just when it seemed like the shock was beginning to fade, questions lingered. Could this have been prevented? Did the system fail Jamisha by releasing Joshua after his juvenile sentence? Should there be stricter monitoring of violent offenders who re-enter the community? These questions don't have easy answers, but they matter, because every life lost to domestic violence is one too many. So, here's what we ask. If you know someone in danger, speak up. If you see signs of control, violence, or fear in someone's relationship, don't look away. Support the organizations doing the hard work, those who help women leave safely, those who house children left behind, and those fighting to reform the laws that failed Jamisha. And most importantly, remember her. Say her name, share her story, because Jamisha was more than a victim. She was a daughter, a sister, a mother, and a life full of potential. Her memory demands not just mourning, but change. Let her story be more than a tragedy. Let it be a catalyst for awareness and justice.